Hi, it's Peggy at Headshots by Peggy, and I have the honor of having Kevin E. West with me today. And he's pretty much the man that knows everything. So he's going to answer all of our questions and tell us everything. Right? Isn't that it, Kevin?
That's a lot of pressure, Peggy. I got
Is
to tell you, I can't. I don't think I can afford to make a mistake. It's not good.
That's so funny. But no, seriously, you are kind of, you have your finger on the pulse. You kind of know what's going on everywhere right now. So there's a lot of things that I want to talk to you about. And then I'm sure you have other things you want to share with us. But let's start with COVID. I mean, let's talk about industry, what's going on right now, how the industry is going to be moving forward now that the vaccinations rolling out, and hopefully we're at least on the right road now to getting some sort of stuff moving.
Well, I mean, we're on the right road in the sense of the country. I don't know that it's going to have. It's not going to have a ton of effect on Hollywood. And the reason I say that is because in July of last year is when the document that was called the Safe Way Forward was drafted, which was the initial effort by the union in terms of some form of production guidelines. That got updated 2 months later in September when they came up with the return to work document, which was a slight adjustment just based on things that had occurred. And I got drug into sort of the COVID testing land. A friend of mine happens to own a company, and I also happen to have a friend who's a scientist. So I spent right coming out of being on the theatrical negotiating committee and coming out of doing that 7.5 weeks of work via Zoom during COVID, I went straight into sort of talking to my scientist friend every other day for an hour along with my friend, and became, kind of exceedingly aware of everything about COVID and all of the months that have passed since then. So whether it's antibody tests or whether it's antigen tests that are rapid, those two, or whether it's just servicing productions for PCR based on the return to work requirements of testing, such as Zone A, the main talent and crew, 3 times every 10 days, that sort of thing. I do that now. I help people facilitate that every day along with the rest of my life. But the vaccine is not going to remove COVID from our lives
Right.
initially, especially throughout the rest of this year. So the reality is, if you're Meryl Streep, or if you're if Merrick is Denzel Washington, if there's a hint of a chance that somebody could be sick and actually cause what would be literally the movie Outbreak on a set, we will have COVID PCR testing through the balance of this year. That doesn't mean that Hollywood won't begin to get back to normal. It already is. We had gotten up to about 40% of production towards the holidays. And then, of course, there was the holiday surge, and then there was the temporary shutdown in January. We are past that now. And as I would say, the genie's out of the bottle. We're not going back. I would say that Hollywood will probably be about 80 or 85% by the end of April.
Oh,
And
good.
we're not
That's
going
good news.
backwards. Yeah.
And I feel like especially the big productions really have it figured out. I know the productions that Merrick's been working with. I mean, they've got the testing figured out. They've got, how to distance, when to mask, when to, when to wear a shield, when to do everything. They really have the actors feeling safe.
Yeah, it was the Wild West, Peggy. I have to tell you, the what I witnessed in July and August, September and October was uncomfortable. Now, I had some auditions through there. I didn't happen to book anything, so I didn't. And funny enough, a couple of them were to Hawaii, which Hawaii was treating COVID exceedingly different. They
Right.
had, they had a different mechanism in terms of labs and requirements, and it was uncomfortable because when the whole becoming a COVID compliance officer, or HHS, health and safety supervisor, the certification with that, I don't want to say it was BS. People treated it as BS. They could get an easy certification, kind of like I can become an officiant to marry you and Merrick, in 10 minutes online. But it
Are
still
you
came.
offering?
No, I'm not offering, because you don't want to hand me that microphone. That's not going to work out well. uh, me in charge of your wedding, really? That's not going to go well. So what happened is, like anything else in life, it just comes down to one's character. We had stories, amongst, I'm a core member of union working, and we had stories coming at us left and right of where people did it really right and people didn't do it really right. Well, a lot of that has sort of drifted, as it does in time when you go through something culturally that's a change. I know many CCOs because it was a very popular thing for actors to do, and now it is, especially at the high level. I mean, I have a couple of friends that are showrunners on shows, and those folks are not screwing around. But even the smaller productions now and commercials, it's gotten to the point where, yeah, you still have some wild hairs out there that are not being particularly smart about it. But in general, I would say a good 90+% of the productions, they're treating it as they should. So
Yeah, that's really good to know. And I've been watching it from the outside, but being very intent on what's going on, and trying to kind of keep a feel. And I feel that Hollywood's done a great job. And I think that SAG-AFTRA's really stepped up and said, okay, we're gonna keep our actors safe and the industry safe, but we're gonna keep moving forward. And I appreciate that, because I, for one, am at the end of Netflix, so we need we need new productions.
yeah, and it was a group effort. I mean, it was the Writers Guild, the Directors Guild, the PGA, and IATSE. I mean, it was a group unified union effort to devise a plan. And the irony is, as much as let's say a good percentage of the rest of this country, whether it's politics or anything else, likes to make fun of Hollywood, the irony is that it may very well be some of the Hollywood model that actually winds up helping the rest of the country get back to school, and a bunch of other things in terms of the model of how we have managed to do it.
Yeah, and I've just been in awe watching this, and how quick they stepped up and made changes and really answered the call. So I appreciate that. I think that's it's been amazing to watch, and I feel like they haven't missed a beat. And of course, like anything, nothing was perfect. There's, everybody was figuring it out on the go.
Yeah,
It was kind of
that's why
like
it's called not. That's why it's called novel Corona. It's new. I
it's
mean,
new.
again,
It's
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 just
a
new.
crisis. We're figuring it out. We're running forward and dodging the things as it happens. But the deal is they ran forward, and I love that. And I appreciate that Hollywood's going to be, the things that they have learned can help get the world back together, because I, for one, would love to have a certain child go back to school, but
Yes, you and millions of others. Yes.
and I don't have little ones at home, so I can't even imagine. But there's some other things that kind of been breaking news, that's going on in the union. It's breaking news for us, but clearly it's something that you've known about for several years. So let's talk about influencers in SAG.
Yeah. How about that? They
How
still
about
have.
that?
They still haven't listed all of the exact language of the contract, so I don't even have that in terms of anything beyond sort of the announcement of it. However, certainly it is something that I think has been a long time coming. I also think that it's something that is necessary, and also, I don't know. I was a guy who spent 7 or 8 months back in 2017 2018, hanging out with a bunch of 24 and 25-year-olds. And I actually developed a 4-page contract and presented that to our national executive director and the head of the commercials department and another top liaison at SAG in a meeting in 2019 or late 2018. It's the first time that, anything like that had ever been drafted. Now, I don't know how much of that language or structure actually made it into the agreement that we made. But that's how long I have been and how serious I took wanting to try to find a way to do this. Mostly from the standpoint that I realize we use the word influencers. I get that. But the truth of the matter is that a good percentage of the influencer content are actually just commercials.
Mhm.
Yes, there's a lot of influencer content that we would not define as technically quote unquote advertising. But the second that somebody, because of their content, gets 50 to a half a million followers, and someone chooses to give them money to stick a product in their hand, that by definition is a commercial. And so I looked at it from the standpoint of, 4 years ago, I looked at it as, this is no different than the fact that when we merged the unions, regardless of that conversation, whether we should or shouldn't have, Screen Actors Guild, American Federation of Radio and Television Artists, the biggest difference in after at that moment in time were broadcasters, people who do the news, meteorologists. That's a very different wing from what we do as scripted work. And that was a lot of the fight and argument, aside from the finances of it, that had to do with the merging of the two unions. But if you can have an entity such as broadcasters, news people in the same union with somebody who does scripted feature films and television, then why in the world can't you find a way to also pull in influencers just based on technology and a group and body of people who are now responsible for a ton of commerce and millions of dollars, who are essentially doing commercials out of their house? And so I'm 100% behind the idea of doing it. I can't wait to see the actual language of it, because I know what I put together. But I do think that it's a step in the right direction. And one of the things that is going to come from that is, what happens is, influencers don't always stay 18 and 19 years old, Peggy. Oddly, father time's undefeated. We all grow up. And at some point, speaking of kids, when you get into your late 20s or early 30s, and all of a sudden you get married and maybe you have a kid, and you start realizing, I don't have any money out of all this that I'm doing, that doesn't go towards a pension. It doesn't go towards a health plan. It doesn't go towards any of those things. Your attitude towards, screw it, I don't need anybody. I don't need the union. It's like, so I think there's some of that it will take time for sure. But I do think it's a step in the right direction. Similar to the fact we recently also, as the Theatrical Standing Committee, created a micro budget contract. It's not necessarily something that was related to the concept of under 5 minutes in Quibi, but it is simply micro budget, because micro budget and influencers very similar in terms of what we have to put out as being a signatory production. So micro budget and influencers both are taking where we are technology wise after 21 years of this century and moving it in the right direction.
That's really good. I'm glad you defined that, because some of the things that I've been hearing are, people saying, being a member of SAG-AFTRA is like an honor. It's like, it shows that I've done the training. It shows that I've done the work. I've put in the work. I'm a real actor. So they're like, how can an influencer come in and be a member of my union when they're just, not a trained actor? So I understand that all unions have different, my son's in an electrical union, and under that union, there's other jobs that, are covered in that. And so I'm trying to look at it as the big picture. And I like the way you explained it. If broadcasters can be in it, why not also? Yes,
Well,
that makes sense.
Not to mention, I mean, obviously, Peggy, you know me long enough. I would obviously, based on my long resume, would consider myself a fairly serious actor. But SAG, even SAG itself, when it was standalone, Screen Actors Guild and the Oscars, let's be clear, we've allowed a lot of people who have no training and who actually never took SAG serious. We've allowed them in commercials and movies and television for decades. So I appreciate I'm going to flip my nose at influencers crap, but unfortunately, it's a little unfair in the sense that someone doesn't know their history very well of going back and looking at movies that have athletes in them and TV shows that have ex-boxers in them. There's a lot of people who have made a lot of money in this union who were quote unquote not necessarily the most serious about their craft. So I can be elitist about some things, but we have to be a little careful with kind of coining influencers as some form of non-real acceptability in the union, because we've had a lot of that for a long time.
That's so true. And I'm really glad that you made that clear, because I know those are the things that I've kind of been hearing, and I can always trust you to just say it the way it is, Kevin.
Well, I mean, come on. I mean, if Dennis Rodman is in movies, then don't talk to me about influencers.
There you go. That's
We've
absolutely
and
true,
we've
because
had,
that's all he is an influencer, really.
well, I
I
mean,
mean,
like Mike, I want to be like Mike Jordan. I mean, Michael Jordan and Larry Bird, and playing a game of horse in a McDonald's campaign, which unfortunately is something that a 20-year-old wouldn't know because it happened before they were born. But, the truth of the matter is we have used musicians, celebrityism in lots of different ways to promote products in commercials that of people who you may have known. You may not know some of these influencers, but let's be careful about the serious actor stuff, because yeah, we we have a lot of people who are quote unquote union dues paying members who have not ever been to an acting class. So let's just calm down on that a little bit. Just a little.
perfect. All right, Kevin, tell us what else is going on in your life. You are always like running at both ends, both
I am.
directions. And
Well, a lot of running in both directions has to do with the COVID testing today, but also, I mean, I have just acquired the second Life Right story that I am working on getting produced, and I'm also a co-producer on another television show that we're trying to get made. But this is pretty exciting because it's related to a geography part of my life in the Bahamas, that where my mother bought a house a long time ago, had some property there. And it's just ironic that this has fallen in my lap the way that it has, but it's a pretty extraordinary story. I can't talk a ton about it because it's really fresh, literally just a couple of weeks old. I even have a conversation, a pitch meeting later this afternoon with a pretty huge entity. So but that's crafting those things takes a long time. For anybody who's watching who's ever done it knows, you just don't you just don't slap a feature treatment or a mini series or a limited series or a pilot treatment together overnight. You should probably spend a little more time on it. So that's going on, and I'm actually recording a scripted podcast for a studio this coming Thursday, Friday. So some things are happening. And like I said, I've had some auditions. I've read for a couple of pilots and a couple of features, and still didn't get Magnum PI, but I'll be completely fine. Who needs to go to Hawaii? I mean,
I
um,
think you've spent a lot of time in Hawaii. I think you're a little spoiled. I think you're a little cocky on that. Hey, I want a 10-day trip to Hawaii and work a day and a half. I think
well,
you
listen,
just like to golf.
sometimes I do like to golf, but I've done Lost, I've done Hawaii 5 so it follows that I certainly should do Magnum PI. I mean, it's just
Absolutely. How many times have you auditioned for Magnum PI?
two so far, but
Okay, well,
it
see,
took me five or six to get Hawaii 5 something like that.
Merrick auditioned, I think, 13 or 14 times for NCIS before they booked him. It became a
I've never
joke
gone that far.
because NCIS, used to, they used to hold their auditions on Friday evenings. So that meant Friday evening traffic to go to this audition. And it was just like a regular thing. Well, this is my NCIS audition. See you in 5 hours. I'll be
Correct.
back.
Yeah, I mean, it goes that way. That wasn't the early part of my career. Hollywood wasn't really like that from 90 to 2000, but it started becoming that once we turned the century, in the sense that it just seemed I never had to read for a show more than twice before I booked it, or I didn't get called back to read for a show again more than twice, and never got it. But it became pretty common after 2000. I mean, I had to read for Bones 6 times, and I had to read for Castle 5 times, and it's also what that, at least I, from my chair as a white boy, it became one of those things where we were at least being a little more fair with diversified casting for roles. And so to me, it just was part of that, as opposed to just reading as a bunch of white guys. When you started mixing in Asian, Latino, and African American into the same role, it made more sense to me. Oh yeah, well, no reason why somebody who's black couldn't do that role. So
Right.
no wonder I have to come back and read more and more. And I have a good dear friend who's a terrific actor, and he had to read for Criminal Minds 13 times before he got it. And I booked Criminal Minds the first time I read for it. But a lot of that, sometimes I don't spend any time, Peggy. I'm too old. I've been doing this too long. I don't spend any time with any sort of ego or BS about that crap, because casting is like dating. It's a lot of mood, timing. So many different factors as to why they actually choose to hire you on that day. I always tell actors, your most important feedback that you could ever get is that when you don't book a job, that office still calls you back in for anything. Doesn't have to be the same show. It's really a matter of whether or not they are willing to spend another effort and another time to give you another job interview audition time over someone else. That is the only feedback you actually ever need in this business. And so I don't get caught up in how many times I had to read for something before I booked it. I really care that, wait, they haven't called me in a while. Did I do something wrong that last time? So that's more what I focus on.
That's cool. So how are you doing with the self-tape auditions? How's that working for you? How are you feeling? Are you
Well,
kind
I
of
think,
good with that now?
this is interesting because once again, same thing, we were already headed that direction. Obviously, Peggy,
Atlanta's been doing it for years, Atlanta market. So
yeah, which is ironically where I started my career a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. We were already headed that way. This was self-taping issues, as far as our union's concerned, were a huge part of conversation in the W&Ws, the wages and working conditions meeting we have before we go into negotiations. So this was a huge topic in terms of the cost and expense and what was now expected of us to be basically, producers at home, and IT and technology and blah, blah, blah. And all that was a huge set of conversation in the W&Ws in 2019 before we got into the negotiations of 2020. And the IT technology, you have IT, you have production, and then you have what we do. And it's a challenge. I mean, some people, like yourself, Merrick, has a reading partner at all times, and I'm sure you do a terrific job for him. I don't. I don't have a reading partner. So there is the combination of trying, especially in COVID, prior to, you had pre-COVID and now COVID, seeing if you can get somebody to come to your house and sit across from you to help the read have more life, and or, you do what a lot of people do, which is you FaceTime them on your laptop and you read to a laptop screen. And the irony in that is that I think that I feel like it has begun to start affecting people's level of their audition, because we're not engaging socially in the world, Peggy. And I do think over the course of time, maybe it's helpful, maybe it's harmful, I'm not sure, people are different, but when you don't spend a lot of time around human beings, even if you're not that social of a person, I do think that it eventually has an effect on us. And one of the things that I can tell you from my showrunner friends and a few other people is that what the studios and networks are starting to discover is, because one of the things about self-tapes we get to do is do 27 takes if we need to, until we get something we really love. And then they hire the person, they get to the set and they can't do the job.
Exactly.
That is a problem. That's a problem. And so again, pros and cons. Genie's out of the bottle. I don't think we're ever going back, even when COVID's over. I mean, commercials, maybe, sure. But I do think there's going to be a percentage of studios, features, and networks that are simply never going to have anybody walk in an office again, just simply out of saving money on the space. And so I think that, as I used to say way back, and it's in my book, I used to consider auditioning for film and television asexual reproduction. And I didn't mean it in a bad way, because there were a handful of casting directors from the old school days and the now school days who really do a terrific job of reading. But it's not their job. It's not casting's job to do a tremendous job of reading with you. It's just not. And if you talk to enough casting directors and casting associates and people who do this, they also are uncomfortable with the idea of trying to do too much for any one person, because they feel like they don't want to give anybody an unfair advantage. And if you sit in their chair for a minute, and if you listen to a casting director for a minute, you can understand that. So I'm not saying they're like when they read with you, but but going way back, all the way to today, I mean, come on. You could be having a really serious emotional read that's about being in love with someone and you're reading with a guy and that's not your sexual orientation. You could also just be reading with somebody who's just spitting the words out. And then I've also read over the years through all the decades of people who were terrific readers, which means they were terrific readers for everyone. I think the IT technical part of self-taping, I think, is beginning to have an effect on people's skill set. And I think it's because of lack of social engagement through COVID. But that's just my opinion. I don't necessarily have a ton of empirical data about that. I just know how much I have to ramp myself up now past what I would normally do, just based on the momentum of the day. So on this Zoom with you, I would say to your audience who watches this, if you think that's something for you, then when you have a self-tape, maybe get outside, maybe just invent a trip to the grocery store, force yourself to have to talk to some people with your mask on, just to get your humanness flowing before you come back and actually lay down the self-tape. It's just a thought, doesn't mean it's going to work for you, but just an idea.
That's a great idea. Because I know it's challenging for a lot of actors, the self-tape thing, and Merrick is lucky. We do it, we do self-tapes here. We do it whether he has an audition or not. We always are, getting in front of the camera and working out the kinks. And at this point, we have a pretty smooth system, in place for doing self-tapes, but not everybody is lucky enough to have the lights and the camera in the studio. They're throwing up a sheet on their bedroom wall and, propping the phone up on a bookshelf. So, but I think I've been amazed watching how creative people are getting. Actors are creative minded people. So it's fun to me to see how they are overcoming that. But I don't think anybody I've heard talk about the lack of human interaction and how that's affecting the audition. And when you said that, it makes perfect sense. In fact, I was talking earlier to my sister about how lucky I am because I am quarantining with my family. And I know I have a lot of friends that are quarantining alone, like yourself. And there's that you don't even realize, but just seeing another human being and interacting is a big part of ourselves. Even people that are hermits or like to be loners or whatever, they still get that interaction from time to time. So that's a good point. I hadn't put that into words yet. I think I was kind of thinking that, but I don't think I had ever articulated that in my brain yet. So I think that you've got something there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, obviously I don't know how much of that is, it could be just a little bit, it's just a tiny bit, right? I don't know. I just know
and
that.
I'm sure it affects every person different. Like some people I think are greatly affected by it. And maybe some people are just mildly affected by it. But I do think that no one is the same as they were a year ago.
Coming up on, well, I consider it March 15th because I booked the Righteous Gemstones. I went to South Carolina and I did 2 episodes, but we cross-bordered them and I flew back. I landed back in LA on Friday the 13th, March 13th, and they shut the country down 2 days later. So March 15th, my birthday's, I'm a Pisces, my birthday's the 5th, coming up on a year of that. It is hard to say. I'm just, as you well know, Peggy, a lot of what I talk about, a lot of what I write about, what the Actors Network formerly as an organization was about is I'm a lot about awareness because we're human. And so my biggest thing is maybe just stop and check in with yourself and see if doing your work is one thing. Sure, I get it, but maybe some degree of edge of just, I always call it idle. We all have a certain idle. Some people are very energetic, but they idle low. Some people actually are kind of coy, but they idle high. There's no right or wrong formula. That's who you are. And how much of not being out and about and having any sort of regular form of life flow from the time you get up. And sometimes we get self-tapes and we literally, I had a pilot audition that I got less than 24 hours and it was 7 pages. And then I got the last Magnum audition I had because of the way the week went. I got it on a Friday and didn't have to have it in until Monday. So, and it was, 4.5 pages. It wasn't really long. So a lot of times we just kind of go as rote because now we're all in a COVID routine. Oh boy.
Yeah.
We all have a COVID routine. And I think that COVID routine could diminish our natural humanness a little bit when it comes to self-tape. That's all. Possible.
Yeah. I think you got something there. I think you got something there. So what do you want in closing? What would you like to share with everyone? What brilliant words of wisdom.
Whoa. Brilliant.
I love to put pressure on you because you jump up to that.
Yeah, I know, but can you bring that down to anything in particular? I mean, what brilliance. I would say that if you have not spent this period of time, at least finding a way to do two things, I would encourage you, because again, yes, our lives are going to loosen up a little, but COVID's not going away this year in 2021. It's going to be, less people are going to die, thank God. And we are going to get back to some semblance of normalcy, but Hollywood is still going to be under a degree of natural quarantine just based on the way our business functions. So at this point, which I presume most people have, but if you haven't really done it, do make sure for yourself that you have cleared out a space, a corner, an area that is, becomes truly your space to do self-tapes. And also do some smart research. It's a word we hate. I get it. But, somebody that's my age going all the way back, research back in the day in the late 80s and 90s was difficult. And research today and the use of and the value of social media, because of what it exposes about those in our profession, is actually pretty simple. And familiarity in relationships and families can breed contempt, but familiarity in our profession breeds confidence, because the more you know about those that you're either going to read for or potentially try to engage, the more helpful your ideas can be in terms of trying to get them to become aware of you. So I will always be somebody who is a big advocate of identifying, 15 or 20 or 30 people in this business that you would like to have be aware you exist, and do some really good research on them.
You did it. You gave us some brilliant words of wisdom right there. You nailed it. Well, Kevin, I so appreciate you coming and hanging out with me. Yo, yes, talk about
and of course,
talk.
no, it's okay. And of course, then there's the book, Seven Deadly Sins: The Actor Overcomes. It's on Amazon. So there you go.
Is this the only book you have out?
Well, it's the only actor book. I have two gift books, which are Kevin's Dictionary, Life in a Word, Politics in a Word. Life is just about life. Politics makes fun of both. So it's red, white, and blue. And I have 5 others in the mix. So.
And your actor book, the 7 Deadly Sins, that is an amazing book.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's a very useful book. It's a very thoughtful book. I mean, you've been in the industry for a few decades now.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You really are good at articulating problems and solutions, and just being aware of watching what's going on and why things aren't working. And I think that every actor should buy your book. And I'm not just here to plug your book. It's a good book. We've had it on our shelf for 3 or 4 years now. And, Mary's read it. I've read it. I'm not an actor, but I talk to actors all the time. So I like to pretend like I know what the heck I'm talking about sometimes. So sometimes I just wing it, but I do really appreciate your book, and the way it's written is very easy to grasp and comprehend. So the link for that, it's on Amazon. I don't know if you can get it anywhere else, but I know you can get it on Amazon. The link's going to be below in the description. And Kevin E. West, just about the Kevin, is it the Kevin E?
The Kevin E, that's correct.
The Kevin E is Instagram and, all over the place. And Kevin is also finally on Clubhouse, so you can.
Yeah. I haven't done a thing yet on Clubhouse, but I will at some point.
I will try to get that changed. So maybe you'll be fortunate enough to be able to talk to him one-on-one in a Clubhouse room one of these days. but make sure you follow him, and leave comments. He'll get back to you. He's a very helpful, intuitive person with lots and lots of insights. And what is your position in SAG? What is your titles with SAG?
Well, I'm an elected union delegate, local LA delegate, because there are delegates all across the country. And then I'm also on the theatrical negotiating committee, which also immediately makes me part of the theatrical standing committee until the elections. The next elections are this summer. I am fairly certain that I'm going to choose to run again. I'm an independent, so we do have two factions, parties, for lack of a better phrase, within our union. But I do stand and always have been an independent. So we'll see what I choose to do.
But so when I say that Kevin has a thumb on the pulse of the industry, he really does. So anyway, Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me. I really appreciate it. Make sure that you guys leave tons and tons of comments, share this with everyone you know, and most importantly, have an amazing week. I'll see you next week.
You too, love. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Text or call today so that we can get you effective headshots that you can use as part of your marketing strategy. Headshots by Peggy, how can I help you?